The courtroom was full that morning. Every bench was taken. People whispered to each other, turning their heads again and again to look at Zainabu. She stood near the front, alone, her hands folded tightly in front of her. She felt every eye on her, judging her before a single word had been spoken. Her heart was beating fast, but she kept her face calm. She had learned a long time ago how to hide her fear. Across the room, her father sat behind his lawyer. Kojo looked relaxed, almost proud. He leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed, a small smile on his face, like this was just another easy win for him. His lawyer whispered something to him, and Kojo nodded, still smiling. He didn't look at Zainabu even once. It was as if she wasn't his daughter at all, just a problem he was ready to crush. Zainabu swallowed hard. She remembered how many times she had stood like this before him at home, blamed for things she didn't do, punished without being heard. Standing in court felt the same, just bigger and louder. The walls were cold, the air heavy. Even the sound of people breathing felt too loud. Some people in the crowd shook their heads, already taking sides. A few whispered, "That's the girl," like she was something dirty. Zainabu heard it, but she didn't react. She kept her eyes forward, focused on the judge's empty chair. This wasn't how she wanted her story to be told. She never wanted her pain displayed like a show. But she was here now. Alone, yes, but still standing. And deep inside her chest, beneath the fear and shame, something else was growing. Quiet strength. She didn't know yet how the day would end, but for the first time, she was ready to face the truth out loud. The judge had barely settled into his seat when Kojo suddenly stood up. No warning. No permission. His chair scraped loudly against the floor, and the sound alone made people turn. His face was red, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with anger. Before anyone could stop him, he pointed straight at Zainabu. "She's a total disgrace," he shouted. His voice filled the courtroom, sharp and cruel. Gasps spread through the room. People shifted in their seats. Some leaned forward, hungry for drama. Others looked uncomfortable, like they had just witnessed something they shouldn't have. Kojo kept going. "This girl embarrassed me," he yelled, his voice shaking now. "She ruined our family name. I raised her, fed her, gave her a roof over her head, and this is how she repays me. By dragging me to court like a criminal." He laughed bitterly, shaking his head as if he was the real victim. Zainabu didn't move. Her hands trembled, but she held them together tightly. Every word felt like a slap. She had heard this speech before, many times behind closed doors. Hearing it out loud in front of strangers made her chest ache. Still she stayed silent. Kojo took a step forward, ignoring the murmurs in the room. "She deserves punishment," he continued. "Not sympathy. Punishment. A child who disrespects her father should be taught a lesson. That's how it's always been." He looked around the courtroom, searching for agreement, like he expected people to nod along. Someone in the back whispered, "Oh my God." Another person covered their mouth. The tension grew thick, heavy, almost painful. Even Kojo's lawyer shifted uncomfortably, gently tugging at his sleeve, but Kojo shook him off. "She lies," Kojo said, his voice rising again. "She plays innocent, but she is stubborn, ungrateful, and proud. She wants to destroy me because I corrected her. Because I refused to let her shame us." His finger was still pointed at Zainabu, like she was on trial for her existence. Zainabu finally looked up. Her eyes met his for a second, not with anger, not with hatred, just hurt, a quiet hurt. She wanted to speak. She wanted to scream that she was tired of being blamed, tired of being silent, but her throat felt locked. The judge raised a hand, trying to restore order, but the damage was already done. Kojo's words hung in the air, ugly and heavy. The courtroom had seen it now. Not just a case, not just a family issue, but a father's rage spilling out, raw and uncontrolled. Zainabu took a slow breath. She felt small, exposed and shaken, but she was still standing. And somewhere between the gasps, the whispers and her father's shouting, the truth had begun to show its face. As Kojo's voice echoed in the courtroom, Zainabu's mind drifted far away. She wasn't there anymore. She was small again, too small to defend herself, too small to understand why silence felt safer than words. She remembered being a quiet child, not because she had nothing to say, but because speaking always brought trouble. If a cup broke, it was Zainabu. If money went missing, it was Zainabu. If someone was unhappy, the finger turned toward her without question. She learned early that explaining only made things worse. So she stopped. At home, punishment came easily. Sometimes it was shouting that shook the walls. Sometimes it was long hours of standing in one place, her legs aching, her eyes burning with tears she was not allowed to cry. Other times it was being ignored completely, like she didn't exist. That silence hurt the most. Her stepmother was always nearby, watching, listening, never stopping it. Sometimes she didn't even need to speak. A small smile would appear on her lips when Kojo's anger turned toward Zainabu. A satisfied look, like everything was going exactly as planned. If Zainabu tried to explain herself, her stepmother would shake her head slowly and say, "See? She's lying again." And that was enough. Zainabu remembered the nights she went to bed hungry because she was being punished. She remembered washing dishes while her siblings played, cleaning floors while her stepmother sat comfortably, watching her work. "This will teach you respect," they would say. But it never taught respect, taught fear. School was no escape. When teachers asked why she was so quiet, she smiled and said she was fine. When classmates laughed too loud, she flinched. She learned how to disappear in a room full of people. Being invisible felt safer than being noticed. There were moments she wanted to speak up. Times she opened her mouth, ready to tell the truth. But her father's voice lived inside her head. Loud, angry, always blaming. So she swallowed her words again and again until silence became her second skin. As she grew older, the blame grew with her. If her siblings failed, she was accused of distracting them. If the house felt tense, she was told she brought bad energy. No matter what happened, she carried the weight of it. Standing in the courtroom now, Zainabu felt that same old feeling crawling up her chest. The urge to shrink, to disappear, to let the storm pass without her speaking. But she was not a child anymore. She took a slow breath. Her hands were shaking, but she didn't hide them. All those years of silence had brought her here. And for the first time she realized something painful but powerful. Her silence had protected them, not her. When the courtroom finally settled, the judge looked calm and patient, as if he had seen stories like this many times before. He adjusted his glasses and nodded for Kojo to speak. Kojo cleared his throat, straightened his jacket, and just like that, his anger softened into something else. Something practiced. "My lord," Kojo began, his voice slower now, almost tired. "I am a simple man, a struggling father who tried his best." He sighed deeply, shaking his head like the weight of the world sat on his shoulders. A few people in the courtroom nodded. This was a story they recognized. Kojo talked about sacrifice. He talked about long days, sleepless nights, and the burden of raising children alone after their mother was gone. He said he worked hard, that he denied himself comfort so his family could survive. As he spoke, he avoided looking at Zainabu, focusing instead on the judge, his voice carefully controlled. "I never asked for thanks," he said quietly. "All I wanted was respect." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But instead, my own daughter turned against me." He described Zainabu as difficult, stubborn, as a girl who questioned authority and refused correction. He said she was influenced by outsiders, filled with ideas that made her forget her place. Every sentence painted him as a tired parent pushed too far, and her as the problem that broke him. The judge listened without interrupting. He didn't raise an eyebrow or frown. He simply listened, his pen moving slowly across his paper. That calm silence made Kojo more confident. He leaned forward, speaking with more emotion now. "I disciplined her because I loved her," Kojo said. "Any father would do the same." He spread his hands slightly, like the answer was obvious. "But she calls it cruelty. She brings family matters into public shame." Murmurs moved through the room. Someone whispered, "Ungrateful children these days." Another shook their head in disappointment. Zainabu heard it all. Each word felt like it was pressing her deeper into the floor. Kojo's lawyer stepped in smoothly, adding dates, small details, legal words that sounded clean and harmless. Together, they turned the story into something simple and familiar. A father wronged, a daughter confused, a case that didn't need much thought. Kojo finished by lowering his head slightly. "My lord, I am here because I had no choice. I am the one being punished now. My name, my dignity, everything I built is under attack." His voice cracked at just the right moment. The courtroom was quiet, heavy. Many people believed him. It showed in their faces. This was the kind of story that made sense. Parents sacrifice. Children rebel. End of story. Zainabu stood there, listening to her life being rewritten. The years of fear, hunger, and silence were reduced to one word: discipline. Her pain was turned into disrespect. Her survival was called betrayal. She wanted to scream that it wasn't that simple. That love doesn't leave bruises you hide or hunger you learn to accept. But she said nothing. Not yet. The judge looked down at his notes, then back up at Kojo. Still calm. Still quiet. And in that silence, the case seemed settled in everyone's mind. Simple story. A simple judgment. But Zainabu knew the truth rarely speaks loudly at first. When Kojo finished speaking, the courtroom felt sure of itself, like the story had already been decided. Zainabu stood quietly, her eyes lowered, her heart heavy. Then her lawyer slowly stood up. There was no drama in the movement, no anger. It was calm. He adjusted his papers and spoke in a soft, steady voice. "My lord," he said, "with your permission, I would like to present some evidence." Kojo didn't react at first. He leaned back again, confident. His smile returned, small and careless. Zainabu felt her chest tighten. She knew what was coming, and at the same time, she wished it wasn't necessary. For years, she had kept these things hidden. Not because they didn't matter, but because she never wanted to hurt anyone back. Her lawyer placed the first document on the desk. Bank records. Clear and simple. He explained how, from a very young age, Zainabu's earnings had been deposited into accounts she didn't control. Money from small jobs, school stipends, later full-time work. Money she never touched. The judge leaned forward slightly. Next came receipts. School fees. Medical bills. Rent payments. All paid by Zainabu. Dates highlighted. Names written clearly. The room grew quieter with each page. Whispers stopped. Kojo shifted in his seat. Then the photos were shown. Not dramatic photos. Just ordinary ones. Zainabu as a teenager, standing in worn clothes while her siblings smiled in new ones. Zainabu in the kitchen late at night, cleaning, cooking, working. Zainabu in hospital corridors, alone. Her lawyer spoke gently. "These were not shared before because my client did not want revenge. She only wanted peace." Zainabu swallowed hard. Her eyes burned. She remembered every moment. Every time she told herself it's okay. Just survive. The lawyer continued. He explained how Zainabu paid debts that were never hers. How notices were addressed to her name. How she covered household expenses while still being called ungrateful. Every fact was backed by paper. Cold. Honest. Impossible to shout down. Kojo's lawyer stood up quickly, objecting. The judge raised a hand. Let him continue. The color slowly drained from Kojo's face. Another document was placed forward. A signed authorization. Kojo had allowed withdrawals from Zainabu's account without her consent. The date was clear. The amount was large. A sharp breath moved through the courtroom. Zainabu felt exposed. Like her private pain was being read out loud. She wanted to disappear. But she stayed still. Her lawyer turned to the judge. "My lord, she never spoke of these things because she was raised to believe silence was respect. That suffering was duty." The judge's pen stopped moving. The lawyer's voice softened even more. She did not come to court to destroy her father. She came because silence was killing her. The room felt different now, heavy in a new way. People avoided looking at Kojo. Some looked at Zainabu with something close to shame. Zainabu lifted her head slightly. Her hands were shaking, but her feet were steady. For the first time, her truth was not just words trapped in her chest. It was real. It was seen. She didn't feel happy. She didn't feel victorious. She felt tired and relieved. She had never wanted revenge. She only wanted the truth to stand where she never could. The courtroom was silent after the last document was presented. Not the comfortable kind of silence, but the heavy kind that presses on your chest. Justice Sewell sat very still, his eyes fixed on the papers in front of him. His pen rested between his fingers, unmoving. For a long moment no one spoke. Kojo shifted in his seat. He cleared his throat, then did it again. The confidence he had walked in with was gone now. Still, he forced a small smile, as if this was just a misunderstanding that would soon pass. Justice Sewell finally looked up. "Mr. Kojo," he said calmly. Kojo straightened at once. "Yes, my lord," he replied quickly, a little too quickly. The judge leaned forward, resting his elbows on the bench. His voice did not rise. He did not sound angry. That made it worse. "You have described yourself as a struggling father," he said slowly. "A man who sacrificed everything for his children." "Yes, my lord," Kojo said, nodding. "That is correct." Justice Sewell picked up one of the bank statements. He looked at it, then back at Kojo. "Can you explain," he asked, "why a struggling father would authorize repeated withdrawals from his daughter's personal account?" The question landed like a slap. Kojo froze. The color drained from his face so fast it was impossible to miss. His mouth opened, then closed. He glanced at his lawyer, then back at the judge. "My lord, he started, but the words didn't come. Justice Sewell didn't rush him. He waited. Kojo swallowed hard. "It was for the household," he said finally. "We are family. What is hers is ours." The judge tilted his head slightly. "Is that so?" he asked. "Then why were these withdrawals made without her knowledge?" Kojo's hands began to shake. He rubbed them together, avoiding eye contact now. "She was young," he said weakly. "She wouldn't understand." A low murmur moved through the courtroom. Justice Sewell picked up another document. "And this medical bill," he said, "paid by the daughter, not you. At a time you claim you were providing fully." Kojo's lips pressed together. Sweat gathered at his temples. The judge's voice remained steady. "Tell this court, Mr. Kojo, when exactly did your daughter stop being a child you were responsible for, and start becoming your provider?" Kojo's head dropped. His lawyer stood up quickly. "My lord, with respect." Justice Sewell raised a hand. "Sit down." The room went completely still. Zainabu watched, her heart pounding. She had never seen her father like this. Cornered, silent. For years, she had been the one unable to speak. Now the roles had quietly changed. Kojo tried again. "I did what any father would do," he said, but his voice cracked. "I was teaching responsibility." Justice Sewell's eyes did not soften. "Responsibility does not mean exploitation," he replied. "Nor does discipline include financial control." Kojo's shoulders sagged. The judge leaned back slightly, but his gaze stayed sharp. "One final question," he said. "Did your daughter ever refuse to help this family?" Kojo didn't answer. The silence stretched, long, unforgiving. In that pause, everything shifted. The story Kojo had told began to fall apart, piece by piece. And for the first time, Zainabu felt something she had never felt in her father's presence before. Not fear. Relief. After the judge's last question, the courtroom felt different, like the air itself had shifted. Justice Sewell nodded to Zainabu's lawyer, giving him a quiet signal to continue. No one interrupted now. No one whispered. Everyone was listening. The lawyer spoke slowly, carefully, as if each sentence carried weight. "The debts this family faced," he said, "were not paid by the father." He paused. "They were paid by the daughter." A soft wave of shock moved through the room. He explained how notices had arrived when Zainabu was barely an adult. Utility bills, loan warnings, overdue rent. Each time she stepped in. Not because she was asked kindly, but because if she didn't, the house would collapse. He moved to the next file. "The younger children," he continued, "were not raised by hired help or by their parents alone." He looked toward Zainabu for a brief moment. "They were raised by her." Zainabu remembered those years clearly, cooking before sunrise, making sure school uniforms were washed, helping with homework while her own books stayed closed, waking up at night when a sibling cried, being called second mother by neighbors, but never being thanked at home. The lawyer went on. When school fees were due, she paid. When medical care was needed, she paid. He lifted another document. When the father was unemployed, she covered expenses without complaint. Kojo stared at the table in front of him. He didn't look up. One sentence at a time, the truth unfolded. Not loudly, not angrily, just steadily. Each fact built on the last, forming a picture no one could ignore. Zainabu's dreams were mentioned next. A training program she qualified for but never attended because the family needed money. A job offer in another city she turned down because no one else would stay home with the children. A savings account emptied to pay someone else's debt. She postponed her life, the lawyer said simply. Again and again. The courtroom was silent. Even the people who once nodded at Kojo's story now looked uneasy. Some shook their heads slowly. Others avoided looking at Zainabu, as if ashamed they hadn't seen it sooner. Zainabu felt her throat tighten. She had never listed these things before. Never added them up. When you are surviving, you don't count the cost. You just keep going. The lawyer ended softly. She did not see herself as a hero. She saw herself as a daughter doing what she was told was right. Justice Sewell looked at Zainabu then, not with pity, with respect. Kojo's shoulders sagged further. The image he had carefully built was gone now. In its place stood the truth. Simple, clear, uncomfortable. Zainabu took a slow breath. For the first time, the room knew her story the way she had lived it. Quietly, fully, and without excuses. The truth hadn't needed shouting. It had only needed space to be heard. Kojo tried to lift his head, but he couldn't. His eyes stayed fixed on the table, like looking up would expose him completely. The man who had walked into court so sure of himself now looked small. His hands moved nervously, rubbing together, then gripping the edge of the desk as if it could hold him steady. When Justice Sewell asked if he had anything to add, Kojo opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He tried again. I was only. His voice broke. He swallowed hard, shaking his head. The words that once flowed so easily were gone. The confidence that filled the room earlier had collapsed into silence. People watched closely. Every shift, every breath. Kojo finally muttered something about misunderstanding, about stress, about being a father under pressure. It sounded weak, even to him. He avoided looking at Zainabu. He avoided looking at anyone. That was when his wife suddenly stood up. "My lord," the stepmother said quickly, her voice sharp with urgency. "I need to explain." Justice Sewell raised his hand at once. "You will sit," he said calmly. She froze. Her mouth stayed open for a second before she slowly sat back down. The room had no patience left. She tried again, softer this time. "I only want to clarify." "No," the judge replied. Not loud, not angry, final. Zainabu felt something heavy loosen inside her chest. 4 years, that woman's voice had controlled the room at home. Look. A single word could turn punishment her way. Now that same voice had no power here. Kojo shifted again, sweat visible on his forehead. "I never meant harm," he whispered. She misunderstood. Justice Sewell looked directly at him. "Harm does not require intention," he said. "It requires impact." Kojo flinched. The stepmother lowered her eyes now, pressing her lips together. She had watched it all happen. She had enjoyed the blame shifting, the silence, the control. And now, for the first time, she was being watched instead. The courtroom felt tense but clear. There was nothing left to twist. Nothing left to explain away. The truth had already been spoken. Zainabu stood quietly, her heart racing. She didn't feel angry. She didn't feel proud. She felt light in a strange way. Like a weight she had carried for years was finally being set down. Kojo still couldn't look up. The father who once demanded obedience now couldn't face his daughter. His shoulders were hunched, his voice barely there. And in that moment, Everyone understood something without it being said. This wasn't about a disobedient child. It never had been. It was about power and how it had been used. Zainabu took a slow breath. She had nothing to prove anymore. The room had already seen enough. The courtroom was silent. Everyone leaned forward, waiting. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Justice Sewell adjusted his glasses and looked down at his notes, then slowly lifted his eyes to scan the room. His voice was calm, steady, and heavy with authority. "This court," he began, "has heard the accounts of both parties." He paused, letting the words settle. "But hearing alone is not enough. We must look at truth, at evidence, and at the impact of actions." He turned slightly toward Kojo. "It has become clear that the defendant, your daughter, has endured far more than anyone has acknowledged. The documents, the records, the sacrifices she made, all show a life lived in service of a family that failed to protect her in return." The room felt hotter somehow. Kojo's shoulders slumped a little. His stepmother's hands fidgeted in her lap. "Emotional abuse," Justice Sewell continued, "is often silent. It is hidden behind smiles, discipline, and authority. But silence does not erase harm. This court has seen that Zainabu was punished, blamed, and controlled unfairly. She was burdened with debts, responsibilities, and sacrifices no child should bear." He lifted a hand, motioning toward Zainabu. "She acted not out of revenge, but out of duty and survival. She did what was necessary, often at the cost of her own dreams and well-being." Kojo tried to shift to speak, but the judge's calm gaze held him still. "Authority is not a shield for cruelty," Justice Sewell said firmly. "Being a parent does not grant the right to exploit, to belittle, or to control through fear. Discipline must be guided by fairness, not anger or selfish interest." He leaned back slightly, letting his words settle. "This court cannot, and will not, protect cruelty disguised as authority. The impact of one's actions on a child, particularly a child who has been silenced for years, must be recognized and acknowledged." A murmur went through the courtroom, but Justice Sewell raised his hand. Silence returned immediately. "Therefore," he continued, his voice steady but cutting through every corner of the room, "the court rules in favor of Zainabu. Her actions were justified, her concerns valid. Her father's authority, which should have protected her, was misused. And this misuse, this pattern of emotional abuse, is condemned here today." He let the words hang for a moment. The weight of them pressed down on Kojo. His lips parted, but no words came. The stepmother's face turned pale. "Let it be known," the judge said finally, "that no person, no parent, and no authority figure is above accountability. The law protects the vulnerable, and it is here to protect those who have been wronged." Zainabu's chest rose and fell slowly. Tears threatened, but she didn't wipe them yet. Relief, long overdue, washed through her. The truth was recognized, her pain acknowledged. Her silence no longer demanded her continued suffering. Kojo stared at the floor. He could not meet anyone's eyes. His stepmother lowered her face into her hands. And in that quiet courtroom it was clear. Justice had been served, not with anger or revenge, but with calm, unshakable truth. Zainabu could finally breathe. The shame she had carried for years no longer belonged to her. Zainabu stood slowly as the judge's gavel echoed one last time. The words had been said. The truth had been heard. The courtroom that had once felt like a cage now felt strangely empty, as if the walls themselves were letting go of years of tension. She didn't feel victorious, not in the way people might think. She felt something quieter, something deeper. Free. Her father sat slumped, unable to meet her eyes. The stepmother avoided looking at anyone. The air still buzzed with whispers, but Zainabu barely heard them. She only heard herself, the steady beat of her own heart, a rhythm that had been buried under years of blame and fear. As she walked toward the door, each step felt lighter than the one before. She wasn't walking out because she had won a case or proven someone wrong. She was walking out because she no longer carried the weight of her father's shame. For years, she had blamed herself for his anger, for his disappointment, for his cruelty. Now she realized none of it was hers to bear. People turned to watch her leave. Some stared with disbelief, some with quiet admiration. But Zainabu didn't notice them. Her eyes were forward, her shoulders straight. For the first time in her life, she walked not to please anyone, not to prove anything, but simply to be herself. Outside, the sunlight was warm on her face. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with something that felt like hope. The city noise hummed around her, but it didn't scare her. She had survived the worst of judgment, the sharpest of words, the heaviest of lies. And she had survived as herself. Zainabu didn't look back. There was no need. The past had been faced. The truth had been spoken. And ahead of her was life, not perfect, not simple, but entirely her own. With every step she took, she felt lighter, stronger, whole. For the first time in a long time, Zainabu smiled. Not because the courtroom had ruled in her favor, but because she had finally freed herself from a burden she never should have carried. She walked out with dignity, and with that, a life that was finally hers.